Christmas Eve. The house is quiet. No one is coming. And instead of loneliness, you feel nothing. Or maybe something you can't name. Not sadness, not longing. Just a strange, unfamiliar stillness. You watch the lights outside, the families gathering, the cars pulling into driveways, and you realize you don't miss anyone, not a single person. And for a moment, you wonder if that makes you broken. There are people who've spent decades believing something is fundamentally wrong with them because they don't feel what they're supposed to feel. They don't ache for company on nights like this. They don't scroll through their phone wishing someone would call. They're not avoiding connection. They're simply not craving it. And in a world that equates solitude with sadness, that absence of longing feels like a confession they can't say out loud, so they carry it quietly, like a secret they're ashamed to name. But what if this emptiness isn't a void? What if it's a clearing? What if the reason you don't miss anyone isn't because you're numb, but because you finally stopped performing a need you never had? There's a psychology behind this that Rainer Maria Rilke understood deeply. And once you understand it, everything about the way you see yourself will shift. Let me explain what's actually happening here. What if this absence of longing isn't a deficit? What if it's not emotional numbness or social failure? What if it's a specific design of your inner world? A way your mind processes connection, energy, and meaning that's fundamentally different from what society celebrates as normal. Most people recharge through external connection. Their energy rises in crowds. Their hearts beat faster around others. But there are people whose nervous systems work differently. Their energy doesn't rise with noise. It drains. Their hearts don't beat faster in crowds. They beat steadier in silence. And after decades of trying to enjoy the very things that exhaust them, they've learned something profound. Sometimes, the absence of celebration isn't a loss. Sometimes, it's a sanctuary. This isn't about hating people. It's not about being incapable of love. It's about recognizing that your emotional ecosystem requires something the world rarely honors: solitude as oxygen, not isolation as punishment. You don't miss anyone tonight because you finally stopped forcing yourself to need what you don't. And that's not broken. That's clarity. But here's the interesting part. This clarity didn't come overnight. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when they tried, when they forced themselves to show up, to smile, to perform the joy everyone else seemed to feel so naturally. They went to the dinners. They attended the gatherings. They said yes when every cell in their body was screaming no. And they believed, deeply, painfully, that something was wrong with them for not enjoying it. I remember someone telling me once, years ago, that solitude was a luxury, not a need. That real connection required effort, required showing up, required pushing past discomfort. And for a long time, I believed that. I believed that my preference for quiet evenings at home was something to overcome, something to fix. I spent years thinking I was broken. I'd watch people around me laugh in groups, make plans, text constantly. And I'd wonder, why don't I want that? But then something shifted, not all at once. Slowly, quietly, like the way snow falls without announcing itself. They stopped apologizing for who they were. They stopped forcing themselves into spaces that drained them. They stopped performing a version of themselves that required constant maintenance. And what they discovered wasn't loneliness, it was peace, it was freedom. It was the profound relief of finally being able to breathe. Their preference for solitude wasn't a flaw. It was a form of self-preservation, a way of guarding their peace in a world that constantly demands performance. A way of protecting their energy from people who take more than they give. And once they understood that, everything changed. Being alone stopped feeling like failure. It started feeling like home. Rilke once wrote that the only journey is the one within. And for people like this, that journey isn't a retreat from life. It's a way of living, a way of honoring the depth and complexity of their inner world, a way of choosing sanctuary over exhaustion. And that choice, after decades of guilt, is one of the bravest things a person can make. Still, here's a curiosity. Why does this way of being feel so wrong to everyone else? Because society has built an entire narrative around the idea that connection is always good, that solitude is always sad, and that people who choose to be alone must be running from something. But what if they're not running at all? What if they're standing still in the one place they've ever felt safe? There's a psychology behind this that most people never understand. Because while the world celebrates togetherness as the highest form of connection, there are people whose hearts don't beat faster in crowds. They beat steadier in silence. Their energy doesn't rise with noise. It drains. And after decades of trying to enjoy the very things that exhaust them, they've learned something the world refuses to teach. Sometimes, the absence of people isn't emptiness. Sometimes, it's fullness. History's greatest thinkers, artists, and writers understood this. Rilke spent years in solitude, believing it was the only way his soul could grow. Thoreau went to the woods to live deliberately, to strip life down to its essentials. Schopenhauer argued that a person can only be themselves when they're alone, and if they don't love solitude, they won't love freedom. These weren't people who failed at connection. They were people who understood that depth requires space, that clarity requires quiet, that peace requires the courage to say no to what everyone else says yes to. And yet, the world still judges. It still asks, why don't you have plans? Why aren't you celebrating? Don't you get lonely? As if the only valid way to live is the one that looks good from the outside. As if peace that happens quietly, in the privacy of your own home, doesn't count. But it does count. It counts more than most people will ever understand. Because choosing solitude in a world that glorifies noise is an act of profound self-knowledge. It's an act of emotional sovereignty. It's an act of saying, I know what I need, and I'm no longer willing to betray myself to make others comfortable. If you are someone who finds more peace in solitude than in crowds, you're not alone. This journey of choosing peace over performance is happening quietly, all over the world, right now. After years of trying to fit in, millions of people like you are finally choosing themselves. Before we go deeper into what this means for your life, take a moment to join this quiet corner of the internet, a space for people who've spent decades feeling different and are finally finding their peace. And if this resonates with you, share in the comments what part of this journey touched you most deeply. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. You're not alone in feeling this way. Let's continue, because what comes next might be the very thing you've been carrying in silence for years. Let me shift for a moment and speak directly to you. Not about you, to you. What if nothing is wrong? What if the reason you don't miss anyone tonight isn't because you're emotionally broken, but because you've finally stopped forcing yourself to feel what you don't? What if the world needs more people like you? People who know the difference between loneliness and solitude, between isolation and sanctuary, between running away and standing still. I spent years thinking I was broken. I'd watch people around me laugh in groups, make plans, text constantly, and I'd wonder, why don't I want that? Why does the thought of a crowded room fill me with dread instead of excitement? Why do I feel more alive in the silence of my own home than I ever did surrounded by people? And then I realized I wasn't broken. I was just built differently. My nervous system didn't recharge through external noise. It recharged through internal stillness. My heart didn't beat faster in crowds. It beat steadier in silence. And that wasn't a flaw. That was design. Rilke understood this. He believed that solitude wasn't a retreat from life, but a return to it. That the only way to truly know yourself was to spend time alone with yourself. That the journey inward was the only journey that mattered. And he was right. Because the people who love solitude aren't running from connection. They're running toward clarity, toward peace, toward the kind of freedom that only comes when you stop performing for an audience that will never understand you. At 50, 60, 70, You've earned the right to choose peace. You've spent decades trying to fit into spaces that were never built for you. You've smiled when you didn't want to. You've shown up when every part of you wanted to stay home. You've performed joy you didn't feel, connection you didn't crave, energy you didn't have. And now, finally, you've stopped. And that's not failure, that's wisdom. And now it's time to talk directly to you. Because maybe you are one of these people. Maybe you are one of these people. Maybe you've spent years believing that your preference for solitude was something to fix. That your lack of desire for constant connection was a sign of emotional damage. That the relief you feel when plans get cancelled is something to be ashamed of. But it's not. It doesn't mean you never get lonely. It doesn't mean you don't value the few deep connections you have. It doesn't mean you're incapable of love. It just means that your emotional ecosystem requires something different, something the world rarely honors, something you finally learned to give yourself, permission to be alone without apology. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is chosen. Loneliness is not. Solitude is a sanctuary. Loneliness is a prison. Solitude gives you clarity, peace, and the space to hear your own thoughts. Loneliness takes those things away, and the people who love being alone aren't lonely. They're free. They're free from the exhausting performance of pretending to enjoy things they don't. Free from the guilt of disappointing people who never understood them. Free from the constant noise of a world that demands their energy without ever giving it back. And that freedom, after decades of trying to earn it through external validation, is the most precious thing they've ever known. Your home isn't a hiding place. It's a fortress, a safe haven, a sanctuary you've built with your own hands, your own choices, your own refusal to keep betraying yourself. And the peace you feel, there isn't emptiness. It's fullness. It's the kind of quiet that nourishes instead of drains, the kind of stillness that heals instead of harms, the kind of solitude that feels like oxygen instead of suffocation. While others fear missing out, you've discovered the joy of opting out, the joy of saying no, the joy of choosing yourself. And that's not selfish. That's survival. That's self-preservation. That's the kind of emotional wisdom it takes most people a lifetime to learn. There is something important still waiting to be said. Because this isn't just about preferring to be alone. It's about understanding why. Let's go deeper into the psychology, because there are specific reasons why some people find more peace in solitude than in connection. And understanding them might be the most validating thing you hear today. First, there's energy management. For some people, socializing isn't energizing. It's exhausting. It's a chore. It's a performance that drains them more than it fills them. Every conversation requires effort. Every smile requires maintenance. Every interaction requires a version of themselves they have to construct and maintain. And after decades of performing socially, they've learned that their energy is finite, that they can't give it away to people who take more than they give, that protecting their peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. Second, there's trust and vulnerability. Many people who prefer solitude have been disappointed by connection. They've been let down by people who promised to stay and didn't. They've been hurt by relationships that took more than they gave. They've learned that not all connection is good connection, that some people drain you, that some relationships cost more than they're worth, and so they've become selective, careful, protective of who they let in, not because they're cold, but because they've learned the hard way that their peace is too precious to give away to people who don't value it. Third, there's the complexity of their inner world. People who love solitude often have rich, deep, complex inner lives. They don't need constant external stimulation because they have an entire universe inside themselves. They think deeply, they feel deeply, they process the world in layers most people never see. And that depth requires space. It requires quiet. It requires the kind of stillness that only comes when you're alone with your own thoughts. And fourth, there's control over their environment. When you're alone, you control the noise, the energy, the pace. You don't have to manage other people's emotions. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be anything other than yourself. And for people who've spent decades performing, that control is sacred. It's the difference between exhaustion and peace, between survival and sanctuary. Here's a secret they rarely say out loud. Sometimes, the reason they love being alone is because the world once disappointed them, and instead of becoming bitter, they became selective. Instead of closing off completely, they opened up carefully. Instead of hating people, they learned to love their own company more. And that's not damage, that's growth. That's the kind of emotional maturity it takes most people a lifetime to reach. To protect your peace after decades of giving it away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the kind of self-knowledge that only comes from years of trying, failing, and finally learning what you actually need. Picture this. You're standing at your window on Christmas Eve, watching the world continue without you. The lights are on in the houses across the street. You can see families moving inside, laughing, gathering, celebrating. And instead of longing, you feel relief, peace, a quiet gratitude for the sanctuary you've built, for the life you've chosen, for the freedom to be exactly who you are without apology. Society glorifies togetherness as if solitude is failure, as if being alone means being lonely, as if the only valid way to live is surrounded by people. But that's not true. Rest is part of growth. Stillness is part of clarity. Solitude is part of strength. And the people who understand that aren't broken, they're evolved. There's a quality most people never develop: self-companionship. The ability to be with yourself without needing distraction, without needing noise, without needing validation from anyone else. It's the ability to sit in silence and feel whole, to spend an evening alone and feel fulfilled, to choose your own company over half-hearted connections and feel free. Your cat curled beside you understands more than most people ever will. Your dog doesn't judge your silence. Your home doesn't demand performance. And the peace you feel in those moments isn't emptiness, it's sanctuary. It's the kind of quiet that nourishes your soul instead of draining it. The kind of stillness that heals instead of harms. While others chase connection, you found something deeper: serenity, clarity, the profound freedom of knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. You are not strange for not missing anyone. You are not broken for preferring your own company. You are not damaged for feeling relief when plans get cancelled. You are not failing at life because you don't want what everyone else wants. You are building a life that doesn't exhaust you. You are protecting a peace you spent decades learning to value. You are honoring a truth about yourself that the world tried to shame you for. And that's not weakness. That's courage. That's the kind of emotional sovereignty most people spend their entire lives searching for. One day, you might choose to connect again. Not because you're forced to, but because you choose to. Not because you need validation, but because you've found someone who doesn't drain you. Someone who understands that your silence isn't rejection, that your solitude isn't sadness, that your peace is something you've earned, not something you're running from. But until then, you have everything you need: your sanctuary, your clarity, your freedom, your peace. And that's not emptiness, that's fullness. That's the kind of life Rilke meant when he said the only journey is the one within. That's the kind of freedom Thoreau meant when he went to the woods to live deliberately. That's the kind of wisdom Schopenhauer meant when he said a person can only be themselves when they're alone. You've earned this peace. After decades of trying to fit into spaces that were never built for you, you've finally built your own. And that's not failure, that's freedom. If this resonates with you, if you want to go even deeper into understanding the psychology of solitude, there's more waiting for you here. Another conversation, another layer, just for you. This is Alone Together. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections. If you're here, you're not broken. You're just built differently, and you're not alone in being alone.